Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. Benjamin's life spiraled into chaos when he uncovered a shocking betrayal from the person he treasured the most. The tale unfolds within the walls of a home that seemed the epitome of prosperity and marital bliss. At 47, Benjamin, a methodical and sharp-minded corporate strategist, had been married to Miley for over 2 decades. Their 23 years together had been marked by professional accomplishments, the creation of an admirable home, and a seemingly perfect life that outsiders envied. Yet, beneath this polished exterior, reality painted a different picture. Benjamin's world revolved around precision and order, traits that had been instrumental in both his career and personal life. Their residence reflected his meticulous nature, particularly the dining room. It was a pristine space rarely used, standing as a symbol of their achievements. The gleaming mahogany table, the intricate crystal chandelier, and the carefully arranged fine china spoke of success. Ironically, their daily lives centered around the kitchen, where Miley prepared meals and Benjamin sifted through work emails. They lived parallel lives, reduced to a rhythm of silent coexistence. One evening, during their habitual quiet routine, Benjamin began to notice subtle yet unmistakable shifts. Miley seemed distracted, her demeanor distant, her responses delayed. She hurried out for work more often and seemed less present when at home. These small signs gradually built up, gnawing at his peace of mind. Then, one evening, as he focused on reports in his home office, the sharp click of Miley's heels on the hardwood floor interrupted his thoughts. She stood at the doorway, her voice cutting through the stillness with an unusual edge. Benjamin glanced up, momentarily thrown off by her tone. "I'm here, Miley," he said, attempting to sound lighthearted. "Come in, let's talk." She stepped in, her face taut with a mixture of frustration and something he couldn't quite place. Settling into the chair opposite him, she sighed heavily. "What do you want, Benjamin?" she asked, her voice tinged with impatience. For weeks, a nagging doubt had consumed him, sparked by her behavior. It began as fleeting thoughts, but had grown into an unavoidable suspicion. Benjamin decided it was time to confront the truth. Summoning his courage, he said, "I need to ask you something, Miley. Be straightforward with me. No evasions." Her eyes narrowed, and she straightened in her chair, her movements deliberate. "Go ahead," she said cautiously. Benjamin drew in a deep breath before speaking. "How would you assess the value of intimacy, Miley? If you had to put a price on it, what would it be?" The atmosphere grew tense, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Miley's eyes widened, her expression shifting to one of shock. She opened her mouth but hesitated, finally managing a whisper. "What are you talking about?" "I'm serious," he pressed. "Do you think it has a price? Do factors like enthusiasm, skill, or even the setting affect its worth? Should it matter whether it happens in a luxurious hotel, a budget motel, or over a simple dinner?" Her face flushed with a mix of disbelief and anger. "This is ridiculous, Benjamin. Why would you even ask me something like that?" He leaned forward, his voice firm. "This isn't just about money, Miley. It's about trust. Or is trust not part of the equation anymore?" His tone turned biting as he added, "If it's not trust, then what is it about? Because clearly you've been spending time with someone who isn't me." Miley's expression faltered, guilt flashing briefly across her face before she managed to compose herself. "Benjamin, you're wrong," she said, her voice unsteady. "It's not what you think. I'm just having dinner with Max." Hearing the name hit him like a punch. Max, her colleague. Benjamin had long harbored doubts about their overly friendly interactions, but now hearing his name from Miley confirmed his worst fears. "Max?" he repeated quietly, disbelief laced in his voice. "You're going to dinner with him? Alone?" Miley's lips pressed into a thin line. "Yes, Benjamin. It's just dinner. We're working on a project, and it's easier to discuss things over a meal." Benjamin's mind raced as he pieced together the fragments of her recent behavior. This wasn't just about a project or dinner. It was about hidden truths, unspoken feelings, and the widening gap between them. "Miley," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "you've been distant for weeks. The way you talk about him, the way you look at him, it's not just work. Stop pretending it is." Miley shifted uneasily, her hands restless as she avoided his eyes. The silence between them grew oppressive, filled with the weight of things left unsaid. In that moment, Benjamin understood that the life they had carefully constructed was beginning to crumble. "Benjamin, listen to me, please. There is absolutely nothing going on between us," Miley said, her voice trembling slightly despite the deliberate cadence of words she must have practiced countless times in her mind. "Is that what you expect me to believe?" Benjamin replied, his tone calm but laced with an unmistakable edge, like a storm brewing just out of sight. "From my perspective," he continued, his voice tightening with each word, "you've grown far too close to him. The late-night conversations, the constant messaging, the way his name seems to weave into every conversation at work events. It's all too much, Miley. I've seen it, and I've noticed it all." Miley's cheeks flushed a deep crimson, and she opened her mouth as if to respond, but no words came. The rebuttal she had prepared evaporated under the weight of Benjamin's unrelenting stare. The unspoken truth loomed between them, heavy and undeniable. "I'm not here for excuses anymore," Benjamin said, his voice sharp and definitive. "I know what's going on, and if you think I'm going to stand idly by and pretend everything's fine, you're mistaken." Tears welled up in Miley's eyes, but Benjamin remained unmoved. His patience, stretched thin for far too long, had finally snapped. "If you attend that dinner," he warned, his voice colder now, "know this, it will mark the beginning of the end. I will never trust you again." The silence that followed was suffocating, a chasm filled with all the words they refused to speak. At last, Benjamin broke it with a quiet but resolute statement. "When you return, I'll still be here. But don't think for a moment that things will ever go back to how they were. I'm done pretending." Miley abruptly pushed back her chair, the harsh scrape of wood against the floor slicing through the tense stillness. She left the room without a word, leaving Benjamin to sit alone in the echo of her departure. It felt irrevocable. The dense, oppressive atmosphere confirmed it. This was the beginning of an inevitable end. As the door closed behind her, Benjamin remained still. The room seemed heavier now, the silence punctuated only by the faint hum of the refrigerator and the muffled sounds of the city beyond. The sharp clack of Miley's heels on the entryway floor and the slam of the door echoed in his ears, but it was the sting of her betrayal that lingered most. The pain cut far deeper than he had anticipated. Control had always been Benjamin's hallmark. He had meticulously organized every aspect of his life, his career, his home, his relationships. Yet now, the life he had spent years building with Miley was unraveling before him. The wound was not just her deceit, but the realization of how trust had eroded quietly over time, leaving their foundation cracked and fragile. Benjamin prided himself on his ability to stay composed, even under immense pressure. But this felt different. This was deeply personal. As the hours dragged on, Benjamin's thoughts darkened, a plan forming in the recesses of his mind, fueled by the ache of betrayal. Miley returned just after 1 a.m, her heels clicking against the tiled floor with an almost ominous rhythm. She had dreaded this moment since the instant she walked out the door. Dinner with Max had been unsettlingly smooth, filled with laughter and professional talk, yet the unspoken tension between them lingered, unmistakable and impossible to ignore. Deep down, she knew she was treading dangerous ground. When she stepped inside, the living room lights flickered on, and there sat Benjamin, still in the chair he had occupied hours earlier. His presence was unnervingly composed, yet brimming with silent intensity. Miley hesitated at the doorway, her hand gripping the knob as she tried to find the right words. "Benjamin," she started, her voice shaky and uncertain. He raised a hand to silence her. "Sit," he commanded, his tone colder than she had ever heard. With her heart pounding, Miley obeyed. The silence stretched on, thick and unbearable. Benjamin's eyes scrutinized her every move, as if he were peeling back layers to expose whatever truth she was hiding. Finally he spoke, his voice low and menacing. "Do you think I'm stupid?" he asked, each word deliberate. Miley's throat tightened. "I don't know what you mean," she replied weakly. "Don't play dumb with me," he shot back, his voice rising slightly. "I know about Max. The late nights, the whispers, the glances. Do you think I've been blind to all of it?" "It's not like that," Miley protested, though her voice wavered. "You're overthinking this." Benjamin rose from his seat, his towering presence looming over her. "Overthinking?" he repeated, his words dripping with fury. "You went to dinner with him tonight, alone, and now you want me to believe nothing happened? Tell me the truth, Miley. Did he kiss you? Did you kiss him?" Her face burned with shame and she recoiled at the accusation. "No," she said firmly, though her voice cracked. "Nothing happened." Benjamin's lips twisted into a bitter smirk. "You want me to believe that? After all the lies? After everything you've hidden from me?" Miley's composure shattered. She had crossed a line and she knew it. Benjamin stepped back, his expression hardening into something unyielding. "I don't care anymore if something happened or not. What matters is that you thought you could deceive me, betray me, and then come back as if nothing had changed. You underestimated me, Miley, and now here we are." His words landed like a gavel, final and unrelenting. Miley sat frozen, unable to speak, as Benjamin turned away. His eyes were dark, resolute. The trust they once shared was gone, replaced by a divide neither of them could cross. This wasn't how things were supposed to conclude, Miley. Her breath caught as she locked eyes with Benjamin. She had seen flashes of his anger before, moments in their marriage where his temper flared like a wildfire. But this was something else entirely. This was a storm she couldn't predict or flee. His gaze wasn't merely filled with pain, it was laden with something far darker, a simmering menace she had never witnessed. The weight of it pressed against her chest, making her breaths shallow and her thoughts scatter. "What are you planning, Benjamin?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling under the strain of her mounting dread. "Are you going to ruin everything we've built?" she continued, her words fragile and laced with desperation. Benjamin tilted his head slightly, a glint of cruel amusement in his eyes. "Oh, Miley," he said, his voice disturbingly calm. "This won't end with something as mundane as divorce. No, you'll face consequences, but not the ones you're expecting." Her pulse quickened as the gravity of his words sank in. Miley knew Benjamin better than anyone, and that knowledge only deepened her fear. He wasn't bluffing. The quiet determination in his expression made that unmistakably clear. The rules of their relationship had changed, and she no longer understood the game they were playing. The days that followed blurred into a tense haze. Benjamin moved through their home with an eerie semblance of normalcy, his silence more oppressive than any shouting match. Miley's every action felt precarious, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Meanwhile, Benjamin was already executing his plans, each move meticulously calculated. It started subtly, with changes so small Miley barely noticed them. Benjamin, ever the strategist, began with Max. Max, who had been texting and calling Miley daily after their dinner, was the first piece on Benjamin's chessboard. Benjamin intercepted Max's calls with perfect timing. In their conversations, he spoke with his usual composure, but let slip just enough to plant seeds of uncertainty. Never anything overt, just enough to make Max question everything. Benjamin's patience was a weapon, and he wielded it expertly, allowing doubt to take root. Max was oblivious to the storm Benjamin was brewing. Those casual remarks, delivered with precision, began to erode the connection Max thought he was building with Miley. Meanwhile, Miley came home each evening to subtle reminders of Benjamin's omnipresence. An unread email from Max left open, a seemingly offhand comment that hit too close to home. Every interaction felt like a carefully orchestrated strike. When Miley tried to confront him, Benjamin disarmed her with an unnervingly gentle smile. "I'm just trying to save what we have," he'd say, his tone dripping with insincere concern. Yet Miley could feel the walls closing in. One evening, Benjamin escalated his game. He reached out to Max directly, extending an invitation for drinks under the guise of a friendly chat. Max, unaware of the trap being set, agreed. When he arrived, Benjamin greeted him warmly, the kind of warmth that masked his true intentions. "Max," Benjamin began, his smile not quite reaching his eyes, "I'm glad we could talk. I've been meaning to discuss Miley." What followed was a masterclass in manipulation. Benjamin steered the conversation expertly, coaxing Max into revealing vulnerabilities he hadn't intended to share. By the time the evening ended, Max left burdened with doubt and guilt, his confidence in his relationship with Miley shaken to its core. The next day, the shift in Max was undeniable. His once eager messages became sparse and curt, his demeanor distant. Miley noticed immediately, but by the time she began piecing things together, the damage was done. Benjamin's plan had unfolded flawlessly. Miley's world began to crumble. Max's sudden withdrawal was only the first domino to fall. The playful banter and secret meetings that once brought her joy were replaced with an icy, impenetrable silence. And her marriage? It had become a hollow shell, a constant reminder of the life she had taken for granted. Benjamin hadn't simply sought revenge, he had dismantled her life with surgical precision. Every element of her betrayal had been accounted for, every piece of her world methodically deconstructed. When the dust settled, Miley stood alone, surrounded by the ruins of her choices. Benjamin, meanwhile, remained composed. There was no gloating, no overt celebration of his victory. His satisfaction lay in the knowledge that he had made betrayal an impossibly high cost to bear. His actions were deliberate and cold, leaving Miley with nothing but regret. In the aftermath, Miley was left to grapple with the consequences of her decisions. Trust, once broken, is a fragile thing, and she now understood that some wounds never truly heal. The life she once cherished was gone, replaced by the haunting reality of what she had lost. This was the price of betrayal, and there was no undoing it. As this tale ends, it carries a stark warning. Trust is a delicate thread, and betrayal can unravel everything. For those who tread carelessly on the fragile bonds of loyalty, remember, the cost of your actions may be far greater than you're prepared to pay. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel. Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. The sharp ring of the doorbell shattered the quiet, pulling me abruptly out of my reverie. The steady drone of the television faded into the background as my attention shifted. I felt a flicker of curiosity, tinged with unease. Who would show up at such a late hour? Slowly I rose from the couch, my steps hesitant as I approached the door. For a moment I hesitated, staring at the peephole as a wave of uncertainty washed over me. Could it possibly be her? Rebecca. Her name drifted into my thoughts like a ghost from a distant storm. After everything that had passed and the chasm of time between us, was it really conceivable she had tracked me down? Part of me considered ignoring the bell, retreating to the mindless comfort of the glowing screen. But I knew that avoiding this wouldn't erase the questions clawing at the edges of my mind. If Rebecca had come all this way, she wouldn't leave without addressing whatever had brought her here. Resigned, I slid the chain lock into place and cracked the door open just enough to meet her gaze. "What are you doing here?" My voice emerged colder than I intended, carrying a brittle edge I couldn't quite hide. "I need to talk to you," she said, her tone a strange blend of hesitation and resolve. Her words left me off balance. "I thought I made it perfectly clear when I left that I didn't want to see you again," I replied, my tone sharper than I'd planned. Rebecca didn't flinch, her eyes steady as the silence stretched between us. "I don't understand why you left," she finally said, her voice firm yet pleading. "One day you were just gone. No explanation, no goodbye. Nothing." Her words hit me harder than I'd expected. She truly didn't know. That night had felt like my world crumbling into pieces, yet here she was, standing on my doorstep, oblivious to the reasons behind my departure. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, my disbelief spilling into my voice. "You can't possibly not know. I warned you. I told you what would happen if you went through with it." Her gaze softened and she stepped closer. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice fragile but determined. Against my better judgment, I unlatched the chain and opened the door wider, letting her in. Rebecca entered with deliberate movements, her steps careful as she perched on the edge of the couch. She sat stiffly, her body language betraying the tension between us. "Would you mind getting me a glass of water?" she asked, her voice trembling just slightly. Wordlessly, I turned toward the kitchen, my mind dragging me back to that night, everything that had led us here. It had started innocently enough. I'd come home from work, expecting the usual quiet evening, only to find Rebecca in the living room, transformed. She stood there in a sleek black dress, radiating a poise that felt unfamiliar, almost distant. "I didn't know we had plans tonight," I'd said, my confusion plain. "We don't," she had replied casually. "I have a date." Her words froze me. "A date? With who?" "Someone new at work," she answered lightly. "His name's Matthew. He invited me to Sylvia's birthday party. He didn't want to go alone." Disbelief coursed through me as I stared at her. "He knows you're married, doesn't he?" She dismissed my question with a shrug. "It doesn't matter. It's nothing like that. I just didn't want to go alone, and you never want to come with me. So I said yes." A knot of unease tightened in my chest. "You know why I don't go, don't you? Sylvia's parties are disasters waiting to happen. You've seen the chaos." Her expression hardened. "You're being ridiculous. She's been my best friend since we were kids. I'm not going to cut her out just because you don't like her." I struggled to stay calm. "It's not about liking her, Rebecca. She's been through 4 divorces because of infidelity. Her parties are wild, drugs, reckless behavior. That's not you. You're better than that." She smirked, dismissing my concerns. "So what? You think I'll cheat on you because she did? Is that what you're saying?" The accusation hit like a slap. "If I didn't before, I do now. You're wearing that dress for him, not me. What other conclusion is there?" Her cheeks flushed, anger flashing in her eyes. "That's a horrible thing to say." "It's the truth," I snapped. "You've gone to her parties before in casual clothes, but tonight, you're dressed to impress, and it's not for me. Don't act like this is innocent." Her voice wavered, but she stood her ground. "You don't understand. This isn't about that." "Then prove it," I countered. "Don't go. Stay home." "I can't," she said softly. "Matthew's counting on me." Her words confirmed my fears. "So he's more important than me," I said bitterly. Rebecca didn't respond immediately, and the silence spoke volumes. Finally, she said, "This won't change us, Michael," before heading to the door. "Don't wait up." "Goodbye, Rebecca," I said, my voice hollow. She paused briefly, then stepped out, the door clicking shut behind her. The silence left in her wake was deafening. Had I overreacted? Maybe. But deep inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was irreparably wrong. Years of trying to steer Rebecca away from Sylvia's toxic influence had come to nothing. That night, as I sat alone in the flickering light of the television, I felt trapped in a spiral of doubt and uncertainty, unsure of what to do next. Should I confront Rebecca? Should I insist that she stay home, demand an explanation for the emotions she'd allowed to flourish, or simply let her leave, knowing full well she was crossing a boundary from which we might never return? By the time I finally collapsed into bed, my thoughts were a maelstrom of fear and uncertainty. Sleep came fitfully, and only for a few hours, until the piercing ring of the phone shattered the fragile calm. It was 1 a.m. Who calls at such an ungodly hour? Half asleep, I groped for the receiver. "Hello? Hello, genius. Did I wake you?" The voice was unmistakable. "Sylvia." "What do you want?" I shot back, irritation dripping from my tone. Her words dripped with venom, laced with an unmistakable satisfaction. "I thought you should know. Your wife has finally found herself a real man." "What the hell are you talking about?" I growled, anger surging to replace the remnants of grogginess. "Exactly what I said," she sneered, her voice deliberately slow, like someone savoring a cruel victory. "Rebecca's with someone who knows how to give her what she really needs. Here, let me prove it." The line crackled briefly before the unmistakable sounds of intimacy filled the air. Raw, unfiltered. Then Rebecca's voice sliced through, clear and unmistakable. "Oh God, yes, take me. Please take me." My grip tightened on the phone as I slammed it down, my hand shaking with shock and fury. Betrayal crashed over me like a tidal wave. Sylvia had orchestrated this, a cruel act of malice, and Rebecca had fallen into her trap. The phone rang again almost immediately, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. I let it tumble from my hand, the ringing echoing in the silent room as I crumbled beneath the weight of devastation. When I finally regained some semblance of composure, I was already packing. Clothes, tools, personal belongings, anything that was mine. By sunrise, I was gone. The betrayal wasn't just in the act itself, but in the complete disregard Rebecca had shown for our life together. Staying wasn't an option. At the bank, I drained our accounts. I resigned from my job without a word of explanation and checked into a motel, leaving behind the ruins of our life. Her calls came incessantly, but I ignored every one of them. I was finished. The next morning, I hit the road with no destination in mind. Eventually, I arrived in Castle Rock, Colorado, a small town promising anonymity and a fresh start. Slowly, I began to rebuild. I found a job, established a routine, and created a life of quiet simplicity. Days passed in calm monotony, free from the chaos that had defined my life before. Yet no matter how far I ran, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that my story with Rebecca wasn't truly over. 2 years passed. Life in Castle Rock became predictable, even pleasant. I had new friends, a steady rhythm, and a sense of independence I hadn't realized I craved. I started dating casually and even developed a quiet companionship with a woman named Elena, who valued peace as much as I did. Yet beneath the surface, a lingering unease remained. Despite everything, I knew Rebecca wouldn't let me go so easily. She never had before. One morning, as I sat sipping coffee and scrolling through work emails, my phone buzzed. A message from an unfamiliar number lit up the screen. "I know you've been avoiding me, Michael. I had to track you down, but I'm here now. Please, can we talk?" Rebecca. My stomach tightened as dread washed over me. How had she found me? A cold realization settled in. This moment had always been inevitable. For 2 years she had been searching, determined to fix what she had shattered. And now, she believed she could waltz back into my life as though nothing had happened. I ignored the message, but the fury it sparked was undeniable. Still, I understood the truth. I couldn't evade her forever. That afternoon, a knock came at my door. I didn't need to check. I already knew. Slowly, I opened it, and there she stood. Time had marked her face, but she was still unmistakably Rebecca. Her presence unleashed a torrent of emotions: anger, disgust, and an aching emptiness. "How did you find me?" I demanded, my voice icy. "A private investigator," she admitted, her tone strained. "I couldn't just let it end like that, Michael. I had to find you." "Why?" The bitterness in my voice was impossible to conceal. "Why now?" Her eyes searched mine, desperate. "Because I love you," she said, her voice trembling. "I made a mistake. I know I did. But that night, I was drugged, Michael. I was coerced into something I didn't choose." I remained unmoved. Her excuses, her justifications, I had heard them all before. "Save it, Rebecca. It's too late. You tore everything apart. You don't get to just show up and expect me to forget all of it." She flinched, but I felt no pity. Her betrayal, her refusal to cut Sylvia out of her life despite my warnings, and her disregard for everything we had built had left me scarred beyond repair. "You never gave me a chance to explain," she pleaded. "I didn't cheat on you willingly. You have to believe me." But I didn't, and I wouldn't. This chapter of my life needed to be closed for good. No matter how hard Rebecca tried to reopen it, I knew I had to shut the door, once and for all. The rage within me flared suddenly, like a spark catching on dry brushwood. "And then you had the audacity to say it wasn't deliberate?" "Really?" "Don't insult me, Rebecca. You knew exactly what you were doing. You willingly placed yourself in that situation. You let Sylvia pull you into her whirlwind of drama, ignoring every caution I gave. I had warned you, clearly and repeatedly, but you chose to block it all out. You walked out of this house, dressed in a way designed to catch another man's eye, fully aware of the message you were sending. When she opened her mouth to respond, I raised a hand sharply, cutting her off. I warned you, Rebecca. That night I told you in no uncertain terms, if you stepped out, it would be the end of us. My voice was icy, unwavering. And now look where we are. All the time, money, and effort you've spent chasing me, wasted. It's over. I'm done. Tears brimmed in her eyes as she whispered, Michael, please, you have to believe me. I never meant to hurt you. You're the only one I've ever loved. Her words tugged at something buried deep, but the fury surged again, fierce and unrelenting. No, Rebecca, I snapped, my tone sharp as a whip. I'm not interested in your apologies. You don't get to walk back into my life after everything you've done. You crossed a boundary that can never be undone. You've inflicted wounds, not just on me, but on yourself. And now? My voice dropped to a cold monotone. Now I feel nothing at all. She stood trembling, the silence between us more suffocating than words ever could be. I told you it would end like this, I said quietly, each word a dagger. You had your chance, Rebecca. Now leave. Her body froze, her face drained of color as she looked at me, despair and disbelief etched into every line of her expression. Michael, she began again, her voice quivering, please don't send me away. I've made mistakes, but my love for you never wavered. Stop right there, I interjected, my tone as frigid as my gaze. You have no idea what you're asking. Do you even comprehend the betrayal, the trust you shattered? Everything we had you discarded as if it were nothing. The woman I once knew as Rebecca had vanished, replaced by a stranger who thought sweet words could erase the damage she had wrought. Forgiveness? She didn't deserve it. I had none to give. Turning abruptly, I walked to the bedroom to change. When I emerged, dressed and resolute, it was with the certainty that there was no going back. Rebecca needed to understand that her choices had consequences, permanent ones. At that moment, the front door swung open, and a tall, striking woman entered, her platinum blonde hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. Her confident smile illuminated the tension in the room. Hey babe, I'm home, she announced cheerfully, oblivious to the charged atmosphere. Rebecca's wide eyes darted between me and the newcomer. The woman, Elena, caught Rebecca's stunned expression and smiled warmly. And who might you be? She asked, her curiosity genuine. This is Rebecca, I said flatly, a smirk playing on my lips. I might have mentioned her once or twice. Rebecca stood motionless, her face ashen. To my surprise, Elena stepped forward and embraced her. Thank you, Elena said sweetly, for leading Michael to me. She turned to me, her eyes sparkling. So, what's for dinner? Rebecca's shock hung in the air, heavy and palpable. The truth struck her like a bolt. She had been replaced. Whatever hold she thought she still had over me was gone. The pain she had inflicted on me was nothing compared to the anguish now etched into her expression. I was thinking we'd go out, I said casually to Elena. I've got reservations at Angelo's. Let me just grab my jacket. As Elena moved toward the bedroom, Rebecca's voice broke through the silence. Does she know you're still married? She demanded, her tone brittle. She does, I replied without hesitation. We've been together for some time now. Rebecca's face contorted with anger and disbelief. You moved on so quickly, just like that? Just like that, I affirmed, my voice resolute. You walked out on me, Rebecca. You made your decision and now I've made mine. It's time for you to move on. Get the divorce. Let this go. You're not coming back here. Her tears glimmered in the dim light, but there was nothing left in me to offer her. No pity, no regret, only the satisfaction of closure. I'm not giving up, Michael, she said, her voice breaking as she stepped closer. I'll fight for you. I shook my head, my resolve unshaken. To fight for me, Rebecca, you'd have to still be here. But you're not. You left. And now you've lost me for good. Her face crumpled, the weight of my words sinking in. Goodbye, Rebecca, I said softly, brushing past her. As the door closed behind me, a wave of liberation washed over me. The life I had rebuilt was untouchable now. In the living room, Elena waited, her smile warm and inviting. The chains of the past were finally falling away. Ready to go? Elena asked, her voice light and full of anticipation. I nodded, returning her smile. Yeah, let's go. Together we stepped into the night, leaving the past where it belonged. For the first time, I felt like I had truly moved forward. There would be no looking back. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel. Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. The frost of that Friday afternoon clung to my skin, colder than any I could recall, marking the instant I saw them. It was a vision so unreal, so jarring, that it felt pulled from the depths of some twisted nightmare. There, standing in the doorway of the home I'd shared with my wife for over 20 years, was Sophia, the woman who once swore eternal devotion to me, accompanied by a man who was unmistakably not me. "Ben, what are you doing here?" Her voice sliced through the silence, high-pitched and laden with disbelief. Her eyes widened as they met mine, seated at the kitchen table. It was clear she hadn't expected me to be home, not on a day when I should have been miles away at work. The man trailing behind her exuded a polished elegance, his tailored suit radiating wealth and self-assurance. He stood as though an extension of her, their synchronized movements unsettlingly perfect. Together they carried an air of rehearsed intimacy that turned my stomach. Sophia's beauty hadn't diminished, but it was as though she had shed the very essence of the woman I once knew. Her familiar features, the auburn waves I'd adored, were now untamed, a stark contrast to her once precise demeanor. Her guarded eyes, once brimming with the warmth of shared memories, now stared coldly. Even her attire, a crisp blouse unbuttoned just enough to catch attention, felt deliberately provocative, a calculated shift I couldn't ignore. "Who's this?" I finally asked, keeping my voice as steady as possible despite the tempest raging inside. I fought to maintain control, to keep the trembling rage from seeping into my tone. The man hesitated, casting a questioning glance at Sophia. When she stepped aside, he offered his hand in an awkward gesture. "Mr. Taylor, I'm Ashton Wright," he said with smooth confidence, his words polished but devoid of warmth. "Sophia and I have been working on a project at the firm." I ignored the offered handshake, choosing instead to study him. My hand tightened around the glass of water I held, the urge to fling it across the room almost overpowering. "I know who you are," I said after a pause, rising from my seat with an unsettling calm. "You're the man who's been spending time with my wife." Sophia's composure faltered. Her face twitched, betraying a crack in her facade. Ashton shifted uncomfortably, casting glances toward the door as though gauging an escape route. He froze, uncertain of his next move. I turned my attention to him, seizing the moment. "So you're the one helping Sophia with her projects, huh?" I spat, my sarcasm cutting and unfiltered. My anger now coursed freely, impossible to restrain. "Ben, stop!" Sophia interjected, her voice sharp and urgent. "We're not here to argue, we need to talk." "Talk?" I shot back, incredulous. "About what? About how you brought this man into my home? Or about the lies you've been weaving for God knows how long?" Her lips tightened, her attempted response faltering as guilt seeped through her expression. But when I finally voiced the question that had gnawed at me for months, her mask shattered completely. "Why wasn't I enough for you anymore?" I demanded, my voice breaking with the weight of the question. Her gaze dropped to the floor, unable to meet mine, and in that moment, clarity struck with brutal force. Her betrayal ran far deeper than the physical. She had abandoned our marriage long before this encounter. I was no longer her partner, merely a relic of a life she had already left behind. A surge of rage swept over me, and for once I didn't stifle it. "I want a divorce, Ben," Sophia said, her voice trembling as the words landed with devastating finality. The force of her statement felt like a blow to the chest, stealing the air from my lungs. "You've got to be kidding me," I replied, my mind reeling. "After everything we've been through, you're going to throw it all away for this?" I gestured toward Ashton, who now seemed desperate to fade into the background. His discomfort was palpable, but Sophia silenced him with a subtle gesture. "Ben," she said, meeting my eyes at last, "we've been through a lot, But this isn't something we can fix. It's different now. Her words pierced through me, leaving me hollow. I wanted to shout, to break something, anything to release the anguish suffocating me. But instead, I stood frozen, the weight of her decision crushing me. "You're right," I said finally, my voice low and steady. "This can't be fixed. You made your choice." For a moment she hesitated, as though reconsidering. But the moment passed, and she turned to Ashton, sealing her betrayal. "We're leaving for the weekend," she announced, her tone resolute. "We need time, together, in the city." And just like that, the life I had built, the love I thought would endure, crumbled into an unrecognizable void. There was no return from this. I needed clarity. "What are you saying?" I managed to ask, my voice trembling as the words escaped. Sophia, her gaze glued to the floor, took a deep breath. Her fingers nervously twisted the wedding ring on her hand, the once sacred symbol now seeming more like a weight. "Ben, please try to understand," she began, her voice shaky yet firm. "This isn't about chasing some reckless thrill or running away from everything." Her hesitation was palpable, the air between us heavy with unspoken truths. She exhaled deeply before continuing, her resolve evident despite the quaver in her tone. "It's about more than that. Ashton and we're going to the city for the weekend because I feel like I'm suffocating here. I need room to breathe, to think, to rediscover who I am outside of this life we've built together." Each word hit me like a blow, her candor slicing through the thin veneer of normalcy we'd maintained. "Our life, Ben, it's become a routine, an endless loop that leaves no space for anything else. I've been drowning in it," she admitted, her voice breaking but gaining strength as she spoke. "We've lost something, and I can't ignore that anymore." Her words grew bolder as she continued, her emotions no longer held in check. "We talk, but we don't connect. We live together, but we're not truly living. Everything feels like it's on autopilot, and I can't keep pretending. I need this time away to figure out if this life is still what I want, if it's what's best for me." Sophia's eyes finally met mine, glistening with a mixture of fear and newfound resolve. "I don't know if this will change anything," she admitted. "I don't even know if I'll come back, but I have to figure this out before it's too late." Her honesty was both brutal and undeniable. She continued, her voice softer now but still resolute. "I'm not sure when I'll return, or if I will at all. This isn't about you being inadequate or unloving, Ben. It's about me needing to confront myself, to face my choices and decide if this is the life I can keep living. If I don't do this, I'll grow resentful, and that resentment will destroy us both." Her shoulders sagged as though unburdening herself of the truth had sapped her strength. "I'm sorry, Ben. This isn't easy for me either, but I need to do this for myself." Sophia stepped toward the door, her decision final. As she moved, Ashton lingered behind, his expression a mix of discomfort and arrogance. The sight of him fueled a storm of emotions within me, anger, pain, and the bitter taste of betrayal. Yet I stayed rooted to the spot, frozen as they left. The door closed behind them with a quiet, devastating click. In the deafening silence that followed, I sank into a chair, my mind racing. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it felt like the unraveling of everything I'd believed in. The foundation of my world had crumbled, leaving me adrift in a sea of uncertainty. For a moment grief consumed me, but then something else emerged. Resolve. If Sophia and Ashton thought this was the end of the story, they were wrong. I took a deep, steadying breath and allowed my mind to shift into a mode of cold calculation. Divorce was inevitable, but so was justice. Ashton wouldn't escape this unscathed. I wasn't about to let them destroy my life without consequences. The house was eerily quiet, but my thoughts churned like a storm. Their betrayal echoed in every corner, fueling my determination. Rising from my seat, I immediately knew the first step: evidence. Sophia's laptop, left carelessly on the dining table, became my weapon. Within an hour, I had unearthed everything: damning emails, text messages, receipts for a necklace I'd never seen but had noticed on her in photos with Ashton. Each revelation was a dagger to the heart, but I channeled the pain into action. By the time I finished, I had gathered an arsenal of proof. To ensure no detail escaped scrutiny, I hired a private investigator to follow their every move. I knew exactly where they would be. A luxury hotel downtown, a place we had once visited during happier times. The bitter irony of it stung, but it also spurred me forward. Monday couldn't come soon enough. As the new week dawned, I was ready. My first stop was my lawyer's office, where I laid everything bare. He listened intently, his expression grim but focused. "We'll move quickly," he assured me. "She'll be served today." This was no longer about heartbreak. It was about strategy. I was no longer just a shattered husband. I was his client. But there was one more confrontation I needed to face. Ashton. He needed to feel the fire he'd ignited. Armed with the address of his office, I arrived unannounced. The receptionist's startled expression betrayed her unease, but she directed me to his door nonetheless. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and I was prepared for whatever came next. Ashton's head jerked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face as I quietly closed the door behind me. The words he had prepared to greet me with faltered, never spoken, as I raised a hand to cut him off. "You've made a grave error," I began, my voice slicing through the stillness like a scalpel. "I'm here to ensure you comprehend the full weight of your actions." The confident facade he wore started to crumble, his gaze darting nervously, a mixture of confusion and unease beginning to take hold. "Ben, we can resolve this," he stammered, half rising from his chair in an uncertain gesture. "There's nothing left to resolve," I interjected coldly. "You'll submit your resignation today. I've already delivered indisputable evidence of your misconduct to the higher-ups. After this, you'll need to find a new profession, a new city, a new existence." My words were unyielding, final, carrying the certainty of a judge pronouncing sentence. Ashton sank back into his chair, his composure unraveling entirely. The fight left him in an instant, extinguished by the stark inevitability of his downfall. He realized there was no way out. My evidence had destroyed any chance he had of salvaging his career here. If he had any sense, he'd disappear and start fresh, far away from this place. With Ashton's fate settled, my attention shifted to Sophia. The divorce papers would arrive at her office, delivered publicly among her colleagues. It was a calculated move, harsh but no harsher than the web of betrayal she had woven over the past months. The fallout was swift and unforgiving. She left message after message on my voicemail, her voice filled with desperation, but I refused to acknowledge her pleas. Her once comforting voice had turned into a bitter echo of her deceit. I ignored her calls, deleted her texts without reading them. The woman I had once adored was gone, replaced by someone I no longer recognized. As the days stretched into weeks, the divorce unfolded with the force of a storm, growing in momentum until there was no stopping it. The evidence I presented in court was airtight, leaving her little room to maneuver. The prenuptial agreement, which had seemed like a trivial safeguard back then, now sealed her fate. She walked away with almost nothing, a consequence of her own choices. But I wasn't done yet. My final act of retribution involved a relic of our shared past. Art had been one of the cornerstones of our relationship. We had spent years curating a collection together, treasures from our travels. One piece in particular, a replica of a Caravaggio painting she cherished, became the centerpiece of my final move. When she came to collect her belongings, I made sure the painting was prominently displayed, her eyes locked onto it as she packed. "You're keeping the Caravaggio?" she asked softly, a faint hope lacing her tone. "It's just a painting," I replied, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "You've lost far more than that." Tears welled in her eyes, but I remained unmoved. The person before me was a shadow of someone I once loved, a fragment of pain and betrayal. "I hope one day you can forgive me," she said, her voice breaking as she stood on the threshold. I turned away, my expression unreadable. "That day will never come," I answered, dismissing her with a finality she couldn't contest. She left, and with her departure, the chapter of our marriage closed for good. What was once a relationship others envied now lay in ruins. I was free, but that freedom came tinged with bitterness. Alone in the silence of the house, I reflected on my decisions. Had I gone too far? Perhaps. But in the wake of betrayal, I had been faced with a choice: remain a victim or take control and rise above it. I had chosen to take control, no matter the cost. As the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched long across the room, I sat with only the quiet as my companion. The echoes of the past were finally still, yet the victory felt hollow. Revenge had claimed a high price, and as night descended, I was left to wonder whether it had been worth it. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.